Alright, good day. So yung topic natin this time is about macroeconomic concepts. So macroeconomic concepts, macroeconomics is the study of the behavior of the economy as a whole. It examines the overall level of a nation's output, employment, and prices. So as you can recall, or at least you can um, at least maalala nyo na kung na-discuss man ito sa inyo before, basic naman siya laging pag when we say economics, we have macroeconomics and microeconomics, di ba? So, for this topic, we will be, or I will be discussing yung macroeconomic. So, when we say macroeconomics, ang kalahatan, di ba? And then, we have the nation's output, yung kabuuang na-produce ng isang bansa, employment, and prices. So, yun yung mga concerns niya. Fundamental concerns of macroeconomics policy. First, why do output and employment sometimes fall? And how can unemployment be reduced? So yun yung isang question or concern. Why do output and employment sometimes fall? Bakit daw kumukonti yung napoproduce or yung isang bansa? Nagkakaroon ng mataas na unemployment. And then, how can unemployment be reduced? So, paano yun mababawasan, di ba? Or ma-minimize yung kawalan ng trabaho? What are the sources of price inflation and how can it be kept under control? So, another concern ng macroeconomic economics policy is ano ba yung mga rason kung bakit nagkakaroon ng inflation o biglang pagtaas ng mga presyo? And paano mo siya makokontrol? And the other one is how can a nation increase its rate of economic growth? So all market economies show patterns of expansion and contraction known as business cycles. So yung business cycles will be discussed sa mga later videos natin or sa mga later online classes natin kung ano-ano ba yung tinatawag na business cycle or cycles. During business cycle downturns such as yung recession, production of goods and services fall and millions of people lose their jobs. So for much of the post-war period, one key goal of macroeconomic policy has been to use monetary and fiscal policy to reduce the severity of business cycle downturns and unemployment. Sometimes countries experience periods of high unemployment which persist even when their economies are expanding. Macroeconomics examines the sources of such unemployment. So yun yung ina-identify ni macroeconomics kung ano ba yung mga um, sources, kung ano yung pinanggagalingan ng mga unemployment na yan. And after diagnosis, can suggest possible remedies such as reforming labor market institutions through reducing the incentives not to work or increase wage flexibility. So those are some examples of controlling or minimizing yung unemployment. The lives of millions of people depend upon whether macroeconomics can find the right answers to these questions. So when it comes to second question, economists have learned that high rates of price inflation have a corrosive effect on market economies. A market economy uses prices, so yun yung benchmark o yan, o yardstick to measure economic values as a way to conduct business. So one simple example dito is that 'di ba pag namimili for example si mother niyo or kung sumasama kayo kung sino man yung namamaligay sa family niyo, 'di ba? For example, si ang father niyo merong certain income for a month, halimbawa 10,000. Now, pagbili nung halimbawa January bumili siya yung 10,000, kasyang-kasya. And then nung February, sobrang kulang, and then the next month gano'n na naman. So nagiging ano siya, sukatan yung mga presyo. Kasi siyempre pagka mataas yung presyo ng isang commodity, 'di ba? So lumiliit yung value ng pera, mas kokonti yung mabibili mo. Now, yun yung nagiging sukatan yung mga presyuhan na yon. Kung yung ekonomiya ba ng isang lugar o ng isang bansa ay on its downfall or at least there is an inflation going on. So yun, laging yun yung basihan ng isang ekonomiya, yung mga presyo, yung mga bilihin. During periods of rapidly rising prices, the yardstick lose its value or yung pera. Um, kung masyado nang mataas yung mga bilihin, di ba? Yung 1,000, kukunti na lang yung mabibili. Like for example, dito sa Mindoro. So, ang tataas na ng presyo ng mga baboy. Why? Kasi one of the problem is that yung nagkaroon nga ng African swine fever from other regions, particularly in NCR and majority part of Luzon. So yung naging source nila, most probably ay dun sa mga isla, like sa atin sa Mindoro, di ba? So ngayon, rather than ibenta dito locally, binibili yun ng mga agent or mga ahente na mas mataas compared dun sa presyo na bibilhin sa mga farmer dito na for selling sa ating mga public market. So, magkakaroon ng shortage. So, Economics 101, di ba? Sa dami ng demand, konti ang supply, tataas yung presyo niya. So, yun yung isang example nun. And people become confused, make mistakes, and spend much of their time worrying about inflation, eating away their incomes. So that's why macroeconomics has increasingly emphasized price stability as a key goal. So when taking under consideration, question 3, the macroeconomics is also concerned with the long-run prosperity of a country. Over a period of decades and more, the growth of a nation's productive potential is the central factor in determining the growth in its real wages and living standards. Over the past years, rapid growth in Asian countries such as Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan sent average incomes for their citizens soaring. So now, countries want to know the ingredients in a successful growth recipe. Does running a big budget deficit or a big trade deficit have harmful long-run effects on growth? What's the role of investment in physical capital, in research and development, and in human capital? Should the government nourish key industries through subsidies and industrial policy, or does a hands-off policy work better? A complication is considering the three central issues is that there are inevitable trade-offs among these goals. So reducing the budget deficit may mean accept slower growth in the short run. So increasing the rate of growth of output over the long run may require greater investment in knowledge and capital. This investment lowers current consumption of food, clothing, and recreation. So after ko ito basahin, i-explain ko na lang siya afterwards. So of all the macroeconomic dilemmas, the most agonizing is the choice between low inflation and low unemployment. So yun yung kumbaga mabigat-bigat na pipiliin mo. Anong gusto mo? Yung low yung inflation pero mataas yung unemployment, or high inflation and mataas naman yung unemployment. So yan. There are no simple formulas for resolving these dilemmas, and macroeconomics differ on the proper approach to take when confronted with high inflation, rising unemployment, or stagnant growth. But with a sound macroeconomic understanding, at least the inevitable means hindi may iwasan. Pain that comes from choosing the best route can be minimized. So theory of economic growth. So these are the theories, ideas to grow an economy ng isang bansa. So economic growth is a product of economic development. Economic development is a progressive process of improving human conditions such as reduction or elimination of poverty, unemployment, illiteracy, inequality, disease, and exploitation. As a process, it involves the interaction of economic and non-economic factors. Economic growth is the increase of the volume of goods and services produced by an economy. This is generally a factor in an increase in the income and or in an income of a nation. It is conventionally measured as the percent rate of increase in real gross domestic product, or yung tinatawag natin GDP. Okay? So, before tayo mag-proceed sa stages of economic growth. So for these explanation statements, ang idea is ano ba yung what are the factors that affects yung inflation and unemployment. So ano ba yung solution ng government? Tataasan ba yung mga produce? Dadamihan ba yung mga produce locally? But it requires huge capital, di ba? Now, saan niya mo ikukunin yung capital? Ipangungutang nyo or um, ayun yung isang common na ginagawa ng government, di ba? For economic development. Now, how can you maintain naman yung ekonomiya ng isang bansa? So, ito yung mga tinatanong nila. And some theories are indicated here kung ano ba yung gagawin or pwedeng gawin ng isang government to improve, to grow their country's economy. So yun. Um, ang some examples dito are when we say theory, ito ay idea, hindi pa siya nagmamaterialize. So first is improving human conditions daw, like i-minimize daw or i-reduce yung poverty. Tapos syempre yung unemployment. So yung illiteracy through education yan. Syempre, disease and exploitation, and then we have health and security. So kung mapapansin nyo, may halo na itong politics, di ba? Like reduction and elimination of poverty. Di ba? Government ang gumagawa niyan. And in the first place, yun talaga ang mandate nila. Di ba? So unemployment to provide jobs for the people. Illiteracy, syempre, is providing education, di ba? And then inequality. So as disease and exploitation. So yun naman ay sa health, and then sa yung when we say exploitation, this concerns with the security. Okay. As a process, it involves the interaction of economic and non-economic factors. Economic growth is the increase in the volume of goods and services produced by an economy. So meaning, yung raw materials, ano ba yung mga napoproduce natin. Remember na ang Pilipinas is one of the, or this is based naman on history and researches. The Philippines is one of the richest country in terms of raw materials and as well as the natural resources, di ba? So stages of economic growth. One theory is determining the stages of economic growth is based on exchange systems. This is from barter economy to money economy and finally to a credit economy. Another approach is based on the dominant productive sectors of the economy. According to this theory, as stated by British economist Colin Clark, there are three stages of economic growth. First, we have agriculture is the main source of unemployment and income. Manufacturing industry becomes major economic activity as a country develops, and then service industries grow to be the dominant feature of the economy as a country further develops. So when we refer to these three economic or three stages of economic growth according to Colin Clark, nasaan kaya yung Pilipinas dito, di ba? Saang stage na kaya tayo? So for me, um, nandito tayo sa pagitan ng first and second. First is yung agriculture is the main source of employment and income, di ba? So medyo totoo ito. And the majority naman sa atin ay, or yung lands natin are agricultural lands. And then we have abundant resources sa ating mga dagat, di ba? So yun, kaya nandito pa tayo sa agriculture is the main source of employment and income. And then, or nandun tayo sa middle niya, kasi nandito na rin tayo almost sa manufacturing industry. Though yung mga manufacturing industry or companies sa Pilipinas, majority of them are operated or owned by foreign countries, meron na rin tayo niyan. So, for me, nandito tayo in between ng 1 and 2. And yung sa mga mayayaman na bansa like Japan, America, for sure nandito na sila sa pangatlo. Service industries grow to be the dominant future, di ba? So, yun. Another theory of classifying the stages of growth is the doctrine of Rustow, an American economic historian. In his book Stages of Economic Growth, the transition of a country's economy from underdevelopment to development passes through several stages, such as, so we have traditional society, preconditions for take off, drive to maturity, age of high mass consumption. So some economic growth models, we have the Ricardian model. Here, the key factor is the land. This means agriculture is the first priority in the attainment of economic growth. Then we have Harod Domar. The key factor in this model is physical capital like machines, buildings, equipment, and so forth. According to this model, the input is capital and its efficiency is determined by the number of output it can produce. So, and then we have Caldor model. Here, the key factor is technology, which is embodied in physical capital. Japan is an example, which has achieved economic growth through technology. So, as you can observe, yung sa ating three stages economic growth ni Colin Clark, same dito halos, di ba? Sa economic growth models. First, we have Ricardian model, almost similar siya sa first stage ng economic growth ni Colin Clark. And then yung manufacturing industry, yan, same siya kay Harold Domar. And then yung Caldor model is almost identical with the third stage economic growth of Colin Clark. So inflation, lagi natin naririnig to sa news or sa ating mga discussion, kahit nung high school pa tayo, siguro nadaanan yun yan. Ano ba yung inflation na tinatawag? There is inflation when there is a rising general level of prices. So lagi na lang yun yung keyword um, na lagi nyo tatandaan when you encounter the word or the term inflation, laging pagtaas ng presyo. Increase in prices is inflation, or we can say that is decrease in the value of money or nababawasan yung value ng pera natin, like sabi nung mga elder, mga ano natin, di ba, father and mga grandma nung 70s, yung 10 pesos sobrang laki ng value niya. It means na yung mga prices at that time hindi siya ganun kataas. Walang inflation na nangyayari or at least sobrang konti. Unlike ngayon, 10 piso, kukunti na lang yung mga bibili nyo, di ba? So yun, yung isang example nun, yung value ng pera ay nababawasan. Demand for goods and services decrease when prices increases. So automatic naman yan, di ba? So kung yung goods and services dumadami yung demand, ay kung yung demand for goods ay nababawasan kung tumataas yung mga presyo kasi hindi na nila ma-afford. Diba? Inflation creates more inflation. When prices keep on increasing, people are inclined to spend their money before it loses its value. So nagkakaroon ng um, takot na baka tumaas na naman yung presyo, bibili na sila ng bibili, and that will result to irrational decision making na hindi naman nila kailangan, basta na lang bumili dahil sa takot na baka tumaas na naman yung presyo. Inflation encourages more consumption and less saving. So yun yung negative to. Like for example, di ba? Sabi dito ay inflation creates more inflation. Like pag tumaas yung presyo ng gasolina, di ba? Lahat tataas na kasi most of the manufacturing industry and even sa mga agricultural industry are dependent on mga gasolina, di ba? So magkakaroon ng domino effect na pag tumaas yung iba, tataas din naman yun. Pag tumaas yung langis, di ba? So types of inflation, we have demand pull inflation. This type of inflation occurs when demand for goods and services exceed supply. Okay? So this is based on the law of supply and demand. Basta pag dumami yung demand, tapos kukunti yung produce, automatic yan, magkakaroon ng inflation, tataas kasi yung presyo niya eh. Diba? Kasi kukunti lang yung supply. Another cause of demand pull inflation is excess of money supply. So yan yung isang problema dyan. Sir, bakit kaya hindi na lang gawin ng gobyerno gumawa ng maraming pera para lahat mayaman na? Hindi siya pwede. Magkakaroon nga ng inflation kasi mawawala na ng value yung pera nyo. So ano pa yung bibilhin nyo doon? Eh kung wala naman na kayong bibilhin, walang nagpo-produce ng mga ano ng raw materials, kukonti yung produce ng isang bansa, marami kayong pera, eh wala naman kayong bibilhin, di ba? So, yan, nagkakaroon ng inflation kasi tumataas yung presyo ng mga supply. So, when money supply increases without corresponding increase in production, yan. Ganon. Kung marami na tayong pera, hindi naman nadagdagan yung produce natin ng palay, hindi nadagdagan yung produce ng ating mga primary commodities. So, wala rin siyang value. Ang mangyayari, doon sa mga natitirang product na produce, tataas yung presyo niya. So cost push inflation and increase in the cost of production results to an increase in prices. Cost increases whenever there is an increase in wages. So yun, so yung oil prices, prices of raw materials. So pag tumaas ang puhunan nga, obviously, babawiin nila yun doon sa kanilang tinda. So magmamahal din yun. For example, before yung 45 days na manok, kaya nyong i-produce na ang gastos niyo sa isang manok halimbawa ay 50 pesos. So mabibenta niyo siya ng 100, 120. So, but nowadays ang mahal na ng feeds. So, halimbawa 70 pesos na, tumaas ng 20 pesos. Obviously, tataas din yung inyong pricing ng manok, di ba? So, yun. So, structural inflation, this view explains that the inability of some sectors of our economy to respond to respond immediately to demand for goods and services we can or when supply cannot meet demand, price increases. If there is no obstacle constraints, whenever prices rise, producers are encouraged to enter the market. So, isang example nito is yung pag-i-import natin ng uh, mga meat or for some instance ay yung mga rice, di ba? So, kung hindi matugunan yung kakulangan, so yun yung ginagawa. Nag-i-import ngayon, ang apektado do'n, since mas mura yung mga in-import, tataas ngayon yung presyo ah, ng mga pinoproduce natin, ng mga local farmers natin. So, hindi siya nakakatulong doon sa, or may instances pa nga na hindi na siya mabibili kasi nga merong mas mura. So, yeah. This increases supply and therefore prices fall. However, there are instances where supply cannot be increased, and at least in a short period. Since supply falls, prices of such scarce product rise, and this inflation for such particular products. So yung next topic natin is about business cycles. So as an overview, microeconomics or macroeconomics deals with the totality of the produced goods or services ng isang bansa and how it affects yung pricing, yun nga, and how it affects yung inflation, unemployment, and the theories kung ano yung mga pwedeng gawin ng isang government to reduce yung inflation and magkaroon ng sustainable na economic development. So next topic will be about business cycles. So thank you for listening. Stay safe and God bless.